we're back with part 2 of this episode because this subject is so controversial and such a hot potato that I thought it would be advisable, let's put it that way, to divide the episode into part 1 and part 2. So, shall we proceed? Thank you. So, on that note, I will now go on to what PQR says. I don't know if you've seen the argy-bargy between JK Rowling and Boy George on X, but the gist of it is that he says trans people have a right to be left alone by a rich, bored bully, and she says she used to be poor and is protecting women who can't afford safe spaces. I can't think of anyone who is more suited to shed light on this subject, not only because you are always so sensible, reasoned, and humane, but also, if you don't mind my saying so, because of the unique experience you had while growing up. If you think this is too hot a potato to handle, I will understand. But it's such an important subject, and you are one of the most suitable people in public life to address it. And I'm sure I'm not the only person who really thinks you could shed some much needed light on it. Oh dear, I hesitated to address this, quite frankly. And then I thought, I'm going to. It's like when I was asked to join, I suppose you could say, a symposium at Cambridge University dealing with the subject of intersexuality. I thought, well, why not? It's my duty. Now, presumably, everybody knows that I was brought up in the wrong sex and that there were reasons for it which hopefully nowadays wouldn't exist, but 76 years ago they existed. So to that extent, and the fact that I have therefore been for much of my life at times by certain people labeled something I'm not. I get that it's in the broad sense, I not only have one foot in one camp, but another foot in another. And therefore, I am qualified up to a point to speak on the subject. Now, it has to be said that the subject is an extremely nuanced and indeed very delicate subject that should not be dealt with by extremists, and it should not be hijacked by theorists. It also is a subject that shows very clearly, as few other subjects show, to what extent the degeneration of the language has resulted in no favors being accorded to people who deserve favors and would most likely achieve them were the language not as debased and discredited as it has been. I am going to use proper language to describe a truly medical situation that in some respects has been confused with other situations that are not medical, and confusion has therefore arisen as a result. And you have all sorts of people jumping on the bandwagon for their own personal needs. Now, I'm here to tell you that anybody who has been trapped in an accident of nature will tell you that handicaps and deformities and biological insufficiencies are no laughing matter. And also, nobody should be condemned for having red hair, black skin, brown skin, white skin, being born with a defective arm, being born in such a way that initially there are doubts as to what that individual is in terms of gender or sex or male or female, whichever way you want to put it, is fine up to this point. I will dispense with the JK Rowling and the Boy George hoo-ha and then get on to the subject itself, because there's a lot of lightning and thunder around JK Rowling and Boy George's hoo-ha, let's put it that way. I actually thought that, I've met Boy George. I don't know him well, but I've met him and I liked him. I've never met JK Rowling, but I admire her, and I admire her gifts as a writer, and I admire her, shall we say, courage in standing up for what she believes in. So let me make that clear. I also do not think that she is actually equipped or indeed qualified in any way, shape, or form to be giving such strong opinions on a subject that she basically knows very little about. She thinks she knows a lot about it, but she doesn't know a lot about it. I also think that Boy George was very dismissive of her on the wrong grounds, and that antagonized her. I thought that it was no credit to her skills as a debater, let's put it that way, to then state that he had ended up in prison because of something he had done to actually somebody that he evidently hired. And he has admitted that what he did was indefensible and should never have happened. And he really was stoned out of his mind. And it doesn't excuse what he did, but it certainly explains it. But she is linking violence with and dismissing serious medical conditions that people have no choice over. I will also point out that not only do I have some experience of the tremendous prejudice that is attracted by people who are born with anomalies, let's put it like that. That means because there is a tremendous amount of embarrassment attached to the subject of people who are born with anomalies. Less so nowadays because of gayness being acceptable, but the trans lobby has actually hijacked very destructively the medical aspects of a serious medical issue and used it to push an agenda that has nothing to do with medical issues. There is a huge difference between transsexualism and transvestism. The whole subject of sex and gender is one that is still in its infancy in terms of knowledge about the what causes certain anomalies. I need to be careful the language I use because this is YouTube. But there are certain. It was only in 1880 that a German called Walter, I can't remember his name, let me see if I can find it, because it's important. What was his name again? Walter Fleming, a biologist, discovered chromosomes. Until then, no one knew about chromosomes. And then in the early 19th century, 20th century, early 1900s, Thomas Hunt Morgan and other people took it a bit further to understand what chromosomes do. The medical orthodoxy at the moment has the view, and this is only a limited part of the medical profession, I have to point out to you. They take the view that anybody with a Y chromosome is male and therefore cannot be categorized as female or a woman. Now, there is a big difference between sex and gender. And this is something that is not generally even acknowledged and usually not addressed. And certainly within the orthodox extremists in the medical profession, they take the view that an X chromosome means one thing, a Y chromosome means something else, and that's the beginning and end of it. That is actually not so. Androgen insensitive XY females are more feminine than most women, most XX women, I should say, and they are born not only looking exactly like XX women, they usually look better than XX women. you cannot categorize them as men. It's because, first of all, they lack the three-piece suite, let's put it that way, that men have. And you cannot have the rationale, which seems to be very prevalent amongst extremists of one ilk as opposed to the other nowadays, that you cannot have a woman with a beard and, shall we say, a masculine three-piece suite. I don't want to use the correct terminology since this is YouTube. And that's quite right. I do not think that somebody who has a beard and a three-piece suite, or even without a beard and a three-piece suite, can be categorized as a woman. I'm sorry, it's not. It's not a woman. Equally, the corollary applies. If you have a beautiful looking woman with the female equivalent of the masculine three-piece suite, shall we say she has, since this is YouTube, I grope for something suitable and diplomatic, which will get the point across. Vertical lips. Hopefully that gets the point across. You cannot say that that is not a woman, that that is a man. Because if you can't say one, you can't say the other. It's simple. And if you say one, you have to say the other. There has to be a degree of consistency. The reality is, and sadly I know sufficient about this subject because of the first 21 years of my life being ruined by supposed medical experts, and then my father's intractability because he didn't want a scandal, and the fact that there were always doctors who were willing to go along with abusing me in the most appalling way, just so that they could earn the money, and they thought, oh, well, why not? They, of course, medical people will always come up if it suits them. Most professionals, lawyers, doctors, accountants, they will take a position and run with it till the cows come home, no matter how illogical or unfounded it is. That's what professionals do. And we need to face the fact that when you're dealing in the real world, you deal with things that are not perfect. And the fact of the matter is, the medical profession's knowledge of the subject of sex is very limited. I know this because I suffered at the hands of doctors as a result of it. Okay, I was suffering the most appalling mistreatment when I was 13 years old. I'm now coming up for 76, so that's 63 years ago. And you would think that things had advanced, and to an extent, sometimes they have advanced, but in other ways they haven't. There are theories as to what sex is. Now, I think I have sufficient insight into the subject because of my circumstances, even though I do not pretend to be a medical expert. And in fact, I have purposely all my life just not even investigated things because, quite frankly, I used to say to people when they say, well, would you be asking a Jewess to go around comparing the scent of Diorissimo with Zyklon B gas just because she happened to have got out while the getting was good? And that really has been my attitude. Nevertheless, I know enough about the subject to say that it is totally fallacious for the orthodox medical profession to say that sex is totally determined by chromosomes. It is not. The proof of the pudding is in the eating. Several years ago now, I took part in a symposium at Cambridge University on the subject of intersexuality with this absolutely beautiful girl who was exquisite and very feminine, tiny hands, tiny feet, beautiful looking, and she was XY androgen insensitive. And when she was 15 and they thought she had ovarian cancer, and they opened her up and discovered she was XY androgen insensitive, the first thing the doctor said to her when she woke up was, "You are a man." She nearly ended up terminating herself. I mean, it's disgraceful that somebody could have said that to a 15-year-old child or to anybody, because she's definitely not a man. But to the orthodox medical profession that believes that if there's a Y chromosome, you have to be a man, they don't go any further than the fact that their logic is faulty, because if she had been a man, why didn't she have male attributes? There is another aspect to this, that there has been research done in Holland, which is discredited by some of the orthodoxy, but embraced by some of the more open-minded members of the medical profession, that sex is actually determined not necessarily, and clearly not necessarily, by the Y chromosome, but by the hormones during gestation. And they think that there is such a thing as a male brain and a female brain. Well, if somebody presents with, and Caitlyn Jenner is an ideal example of this, because Caitlyn Jenner, as Bruce Jenner, was the archetype of masculinity. But Bruce always regarded himself as Caitlyn. And so you can't say he was a weed and worm, and therefore he despised his masculinity, because he didn't. He was one of the greatest athletes of all time. And that tends to prove the theory that, in fact, sex or perception of sex is innate, and that you are born with perception of sex, and that it is something that is created in the womb. Now, there are many other things that are created in the womb that you're born with: genius, imbecility, great musical talent, total lack of talent, great talent as an artist, as a writer, etc. These are all, we don't really know enough to, and we most likely will never know enough to know all of the mysteries of life. But my suspicion is that ultimately, when the medical profession knows more than it does at this point, they are going to understand that transsexualism, which is entirely different from transvestism, which is somebody who is and perceives himself or herself as being the sex that he or she was born, but likes dressing up and presenting as the other sex, has nothing to do with the medical, the physiological condition of transsexualism. Now, what has happened in the trans movement is that the transvestites have hijacked the medical aspect of transsexualism, and they have melded the two. So you have fish and fowl who are supposed to be flying together, but fish and fowl can't fly together logically. And because there are similarities that people think, oh, well, one is the other. They're not. They're absolutely not. They are totally different. And this is where the trans movement has actually done the transsexual medical aspect of the movement no favors whatsoever. Now, insofar as I see it, insofar as biological males who want to be chemically and surgically treated to display the attributes of the opposite sex are concerned in terms of athletics. Obviously, anybody who has been through the male puberty will have an advantage. Now, it also has to be said that doesn't only apply to transsexuals, but I certainly think that a transsexual should not be allowed to compete against a female who is XX, unless you have a handicap system the way you have in racing, or indeed to a degree you have in boxing, where you have welterweight, heavyweight, lightweight. But I think where boxing is concerned, if you have an XX female and an XY female, which is what you had with that person called, what's her name again? I think her name is Imane Khelif, something like that, who won the boxing championship in the Paris 2024 Olympics. Now, I thought that it was totally inappropriate and actually cruel and inhumane of JK Rowling to keep on referring to her as a man. She's not a man. She was born intersex. She is not a man. She doesn't have a three-piece suite. She doesn't have the physical attributes of a man in terms of sexual characteristics. So she can't be a man. And I get that J.K. Rowling was making a point. Well, it would have been one thing to say that she was biologically male and had an advantage, which she might well have had, but equally she might have had no advantage whatsoever naturally. Now, I think in a situation like that, it's best to err on the side of caution and just make sure that people with what is a possible genetic advantage are ruled out of participation in the sport. So, but until such time as those rules are introduced, I think it was the height of poor form and indeed cruelty to keep on referring to her as a man. I mean, she wasn't born a man. She doesn't have the attributes of a man in terms of sexual characteristics. It is inaccurate to call her a man, and I think it's, as I said, it's also cruel. Uh, there is a very famous movie actress who was born with a fairly similar condition to Imane Khelif, and nobody regards her as a man. So, but this is where people become extreme and intractable and dig their heels in and then lose the really begin to lose the argument by being intractable. I mean, I don't think that I agree with Martina Navratilova, Caitlyn Jenner, Sharon Davis, all of them who have said that they do not think, for instance, Leah Thomas, I gather, wasn't even post-operative. But even if she had been post-operative, and I'm being polite when I say use that pronoun, I'm sorry, there's no way that Leah Thomas should have been competing against girls swimming. I'm sorry, it's just not on. I mean, we do need to have justice, and justice requires that somebody who is biologically disadvantaged against somebody who has a biological advantage, that either they're handicapped, like maybe strapping on lead onto Leah Thomas's arms and legs so that Leah Thomas ends up swimming with the same strength as, but also Leah Thomas was about a foot taller than everybody else. So there's that to consider as well. And I mean, so the fact of the matter is, though, that if you consider another aspect to it, I mean, when I was 13, I was hospitalized and shot up with male hormones. Of course, that affects any girl. It masculinizes any girl. I mean, I don't know to what extent I would have developed differently in terms of height. I mean, I have the hands, same size hands and feet as my Aunt Marjorie. We were the same height. So maybe it didn't make any difference in terms of things like that. But maybe it did. Maybe I'd have been shorter. I don't, but as I say, I was the exact same height as well as my Aunt Marjorie. So who knows? The fact of the matter is, no medical doctor should be shooting up a 13-year-old, especially against her will, with male hormones. It's just it's torture aside from anything else. But insofar as JK Rowling versus Boy George is concerned, she made an interesting point. She made a point that many acts of, shall we say, taking physical advantage of others, or the majority is men. Well, I have to tell you, in 1981, I took part in a fundraiser for the Chiswick Refuge for Battered Women, which was founded by Erin Pizzey. Erin Pizzey was the great heroine of the refuge movement in this country. She founded the first refuge for women who had been subjected to a certain sort of treatment. And by then it was no secret that I had been subjected to similar treatment by my husband. And I was asked if I would take part, and I did. And my participation, it has to be said, was very minimal, but it was a very good cause and I was happy to do it. But Erin Pizzey made some really interesting points, because once Erin Pizzey, and she's still alive, she's a splendid woman, and in fact her ex-husband Jack is the ex-husband of a great friend of mine. Small world. And she made some points that when she looked into the prevalence of, shall we say, unacceptable behavior between the sexes, it appeared to be male-led, but it often wasn't. That it was often female-led. And of course, she had the wrath of the sisterhood brought down on her head for speaking such truths. But yes, the male hormone does make people more aggressive than the female hormone. And this is where, again, hormone treatment in terms of transsexualism steps in. Because transvestites, I do not think, take hormones, but I think transsexuals do. And they, to have the attributes of the sex that they wish to become, they are given the hormones of the opposite sex. And therefore, much of the advantage that they would have had is lost, but not necessarily all. And depending on the age at which they start the treatment, they do have physiological advantages, which definitely rule them out from joining the level playing field of XX sport. Now, of course, all of the debate in terms of JK Rowling and Imane Khelif and introduces another element to the subject. What do you do with athletes like Semenya and Imane Khelif? These are aspects that should be carefully considered with justice for all. But I do think that we need to remember that we are dealing with human beings who did not ask to be born the way they were, and who are deserving of respect. And if the rules need to be changed, they should be. But I think toning down the temperature by several degrees would be very appropriate, where both JK Rowling is concerned and some of her critics, because the fact of the matter is that if the gay stroke, trans stroke, LBG, etc. movement hadn't hijacked a perfectly legitimate medical condition and turned and incorporated all sorts of elements that are not medical and had fall way outside of that umbrella, much of what has happened would not have happened, and many of the injustices that have been caused would not have arisen at all. And the reality is that the recent ruling in terms of sex in this country has taken things back to the 1970 ruling Corbett versus Corbett. Now, I knew April Ashley very slightly. I first met her at an oldies luncheon that Giles Brandreth organised when I left the jungle. And I then met her on one other occasion at one of Giles's other parties. And I was delighted to meet her. Of course, I knew exactly who she was, because she was Britain's most famous transsexual. She was very beautiful, and she was actually very nice. But, you know, would you have called April Ashley a man? Well, I'm afraid I wouldn't have called her a man. I would have said that because she had displayed all of the attributes of womanhood, I would have said that until such time as seems likely it is going to emerge, that transsexualism is a matter of the brain of one sex in the body of another, and until you can do whatever needs to be done in the brain to bring coordination and accord into the individual, surgical intervention physiologically is the only cure. And I've read April Ashley's autobiography, and she made no bones about the fact that if she had not met Dr. Buru, she would have ended up no longer being here. And I see no great harm in treating situations like that compassionately and not confusing them with social choices and social predilections that have nothing to do with sex. Because you can be, in my opinion, only really one of two sexes. There's the male sex and the female sex. And people who are intersex fall somewhere between the two, but their perception is of one or the other. And the fact that the trans movement and the fashion to be trans and to be, there's in certain circles, it's chic to be trans. I mean, who ever heard of people regarding it as chic to actually be somebody who was born with a physiological or a genetic, or however you put it, defect? I mean, sorry, because that's what it is. When you are born, as I was, with a physical defect, I mean, I said at the lecture that I was asked to take part in at Cambridge University, I made the point that I was born with a deformity, and which I was. And afterwards, the organizer, who was a man with a beard and a three-piece suite who was dressing as a woman, said that he had decided that he was intersex. Well, he certainly wasn't. I mean, he certainly wasn't. He was a transvestite. and ticked me off for having said that I had been born with a deformity. Well, of course I was born with a deformity. What's wrong with that? I mean, why should language be distorted to convey not accuracy, but inaccuracy? Because if you stick to the accurate language, which is you're born with a deformity, that can then hopefully be conformed. Let's put it that way. That's a solution. But to be wishy-washy and muck around, I mean, people do it in other spheres nowadays. 50 years ago, there was nothing wrong in being white, subcontinental, black, or colored. And you could be an octoroon, a quadroon, a mulatto, all of which meant that you were 1 degree, 2 degrees, 3 degrees, 4 degrees, whatever. Now you're not allowed to use any of those terms, and you speak about people of color. So you no longer have the Negro race, you have black people. Then you have people saying Jesus was black because Jesus was, according to them, an olive-skinned Jew. Well, Jews are not black. Jews are Semites. Semites are Caucasian. No matter how dark-skinned they are white. I mean, really, the mucking around that's done nowadays. So you have somebody saying they're black when they're whiter than a lily. I mean, why not be accurate? I'll tell you one of the reasons why. Because language degenerates along with thought. And clarity of thought is what liberates us. Clarity of language is what leads us to the light. When you get people trying to muddy the waters, they're not interested in clarity. They are interested in agendas which usually result in what is happening now in terms of the argy-bargy with JK Rowling and Boy George. And on that note, I'm going to say thank you for listening. I hope this has been of some interest to you, and if not, of some instructiveness. And I really would prefer not to harbor too many sessions of this sort. So with due respect, I'm not sure it's something I want to keep on addressing. I felt it was important because, yes, I agree that I do have a contribution to make. And my contribution is that extremists on both sides should shut up, get out, and also leave it up to people who are suffering as a result of accidents of nature, and don't confuse it with choices that people make. Natural choices maybe, but choices that people make. Nobody chooses to be born deformed or inadequate or defective or imperfect, or however you want to dress it up. The fact of the matter is, if you're born with a disadvantage or a handicap or a defect, you are born with it. And I think that deserves some recognition, and it doesn't deserve to be hijacked by all sorts of fashionable and, shall we say, virtue signaling people who jump on the bandwagon for their own greater glorification. And on that note, I'll say thank you very much for listening. I hope this has been of some interest, and Godspeed. Bye-bye. And if you have truly enjoyed this, enjoy is not the right word, but we'll settle for it for the moment. Please like, share, subscribe, press the notification bell, and Godspeed. Bye-bye.